Performance perspective and psycholinguistics, the role of negative evidence. If we want to see how a second language is learned with the use of second language, then, and if we are also looking at the whole thing from the perspective of psycholinguistics, then the role of negative evidence is one of the things that has led to a controversy. Now, before we move on to this controversy, let us see what is negative evidence. Negative evidence is an input that lets the learner know that the language form he or she is using is aberrant or is not correct. So this can take different forms. It can be a formal correction by the teacher in a classroom. So a student says something in English and the teacher rephrases it or corrects the student formally. It can be also informal. So in a native situation, in a situation where the language is being used with a native speaker, or even when it is not being used with a native speaker, the person whom he or she is trying to communicate rephrases what is being said or corrects the learner. This is also informal negative evidence that the learner will know. So negative evidence actually is highlighting what is wrong or what is deviant from the norms of language use. So a learner comes to know that the language form he or she is using is not correct. So the question is, if one highlights that the certain form or a certain form that is being used by the learner is not correct, will it help him or her in the learning of the second language? Now, there are differences. There are people who would say that no matter how much you correct a student or a learner, the correction seems ineffective because the learner will keep on making that mistake. And this error or this mistake will be repeated because this is a developmental stage in the learning of the language. And then there are others who say that this correction is important because unless we correct the learner will never realize that the language that he or she is using is not the norm or is not correct. So the proponents of the other side of psycholinguistics, they would say that if you are teaching a language to a student, then only positive evidence should be used. That is, the students should be or the learners should be encouraged to use language by using the correct forms. And if there is a certain mistake that a learner makes, then the learner should be allowed to make that mistake, because what comes first is the confidence to speak in English language, and what comes first is fluency and not accuracy. Now, this is a tension that we as teachers of second language education confront every day in our classrooms. So this is a decision that you make, but this decision should be made with caution, because if we do not correct the learners in in their mistakes, there is also this problem of fossilization. The more the learner uses the incorrect form, and the more the incorrect form of the second language is accepted by other people, the more fossilized will it become. So the more difficult it will be for the learner to correct that form later on.